You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Reyna Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have a really cool special guest / co-host, Joseph, and I've honestly wanted to do this episode together for a while, but I didn't really know how we were going to intro it or what to talk about, so we're just kind of hanging out, and these are our thoughts on marriage. So babe, usually I just kind of intro our guest at this point. So if you want to tell our community a little bit about you so we can get a better idea of just who you are, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm sure Reyna's talked about me a little bit. So Joseph Wilson, been married to Reyna for 4.5 years now, going on 5. We met my senior year of college in the spring semester, so just in the nick of time before I left for the Army. And graduated from TCU with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Before that, I was homeschooled all 12 years up in Fort Worth, Texas. And then the past 5 years, I've been in the Army.
Yeah, we love our Army life. I know I've shared a little bit about it, but that's thanks to Joseph. But honestly, I think it's been really good for us. I knew that Joseph had the Army in line for him as we started dating, and that was honestly like a really big initial conversation for us. Was like, hey, I'm about to leave and join the Army. Like, are we about this or not? So I'm super excited for this conversation, just to give a little bit more insight into our life and our marriage specifically. I feel like we could do a parenting / like parenthood episode later. I feel like that would be good.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're also weenies in parenting because we just have a toddler. But I would love to just go ahead and dive in, and a couple of things. We just want to cover a handful of things. And one of the big topics I feel like we have talked about within our marriage, as well as like friends of ours, are like 3 things that we do differently for our marriage, whether that's things that I've noticed that were differently from how our parents raised us, or my parents specifically, or Joseph's parents, and things that we really pride ourselves on. And I'll start that. One of those things is we don't speak negatively about our spouse to like friends. And I wouldn't say so much like that's prevalent, or I've heard that with friends of mine, but I think it's something that's like all too easily, I think, dismissed, or people do it like, I guess just dismissively of like, yeah, this happened today, and you know, this is what happened at home, blah, blah, blah. And the way that I had it explained to us, I think JC had talked to us about it, or even just me when we were dating, was like, if say you speak to like your best friend and you tell your best friend that, oh, like Joseph did blah, blah, blah today, and then, you know, Joseph and I had this huge argument, and I tell my best friend about it, but then I go back and talk to Joseph, and like we clear the air and everything, and like we're fine. The next time that my best friend sees Joseph, she's gonna be like, oh, what the heck, because I remember this thing that Reyna told me about that you did to her. So I feel like it's so hard to not, I think, close the loop is just something we've talked about, which like you can easily do that. But for us, we just set the boundary of like the people closest to us kind of get to hear the mess or hardships and hurts that we're walking through, as long as it's like trusted counsel. But like we don't, that's a big like no for us. It's like we don't air dirty laundry to other people. And I think this kind of goes in line with how we manage conflict, which I think is something we do pretty differently.
Yeah, so you always have so many people, you know, talking about, you know, don't go to sleep if you're angry or upset at each other. And that's like very much kind of the fairy tale world side of things. Like, it's just not possible to take care of everything or to unpack everything all in one night, or for us the 2 hours that we have after Ledger goes to sleep. That's probably another conversation for that parenting episode of not having full-blown meltdowns or arguments or hardcore discussions in front of your kids, because they're absolutely watching you. They're not just copying you, they're watching and learning from you. But sometimes we have to openly say, I don't think I have anything else on this topic, but we're going to have to talk about it later. Because not everything it's like when you have an argument with your friends or your boss or something, and then like 4 hours later when you're alone, you're like, oh, dang it, I should have said this. It's exactly what happens with us. And so sometimes we have to take a pause, because then we're just going to start going in circles round and round, because Reyna was raised one way, I was raised another. And the first thing that you do when you hit conflict or hardship is to go back to what you know. And since Reyna and I are two very different people, we go back to those different things. And so sometimes we have to take a break, reset our mind, and then come back together. And I think we've had a lot of success doing that.
And one of the other things I think that we do differently, and we honestly prioritize for like big life changes for us, is couples counseling. We had friends that really encouraged us to do that early on in our marriage, and it was a saving grace. Not in the way that like, we were on the rocks or anything, but it was just so good for us to have someone mediate conversations of like trying to manage our expectations. So like when we found out we were pregnant with Ledger, we had the opportunity to see multiple counselors up until his birth, and then afterwards, because like having a baby is like huge life change, and I think that made all the difference for us, especially once he was here.
Yeah, counseling is very important, not just for the aspect of you get somebody else's opinion, but the fact that you get an opinion on something you've possibly never been through before. I've never been married before I met Reyna. I have never had a son or just a kid in general before I had Ledger. And I've never been, in the Army before I joined the Army. So it's really absurd that like counseling has such a negative connotation of, oh, wow, you're seeking help. I can't believe that. Because we've never actually done any of the things that we're doing in life. And I always want as much advice as I possibly can on something. I love to be prepared for things. We all hate going into a meeting or an assignment or a work day and we have no idea what's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to be prepared for it. Being in the Army and having soldiers when I was a platoon leader, being in a predominantly male organization, sometimes seeking help, especially on the emotional side of things, it isn't always put on a pedestal as something incredible. And the way I always explain it to people is, one, I can use myself as an example of like actually leading and being open about, that I was getting marriage counseling, even, just being married for 2 years before I had a kid. Because why would I not want someone to speak positively into my life who has done it for, 20 to 30 years? And so I was able to speak to that to a lot of my soldiers, but also explain it to them of, a PT test. For physical training. If I want to do better at a PT test, I'm not just going to do nothing and then just wake up the next morning and just really hope that I get it taken care of and I'm good at it. No, we're going to go to the gym every single day. We're going to, start working out for an hour, then maybe do it also in the afternoon. But I'm also going to do other things for my body, like eat correctly, drink water the time before. So just applying that to your mental health and specifically to our marriage and to, our relationship with Ledger and how we raise him is extremely important in actually making sure that you make the correct decisions. Because teaching yourself how to do something like working out is nearly impossible. You have to get other people's opinions, maybe have somebody watch you if you're trying to do a lift. And it's the same thing when talking to your friends, tactfully, not negatively, as Reyna discussed earlier. But having that counselor that you go to can be extremely important. And fortunately for us, we're in the Army. So, every military installation has the Military Family Life Counseling Center, MFLC, that you can go to. It's totally free. Unfortunately, they're only open during work hours. Or you can go through Military One Source, and you can get assigned counselors, whether it be online or...
Yeah, you're totally right. I'll just plug that. Also real quick for my fellow military friends. If you're looking for virtual counseling And even if you want biblical virtual counseling, one, I have a friend, Allie. I will link her virtual counseling. She's just great, just in general. I love her. I trust her. But I know that she serves people virtually. And then in terms of military, like TRICARE covered counseling, Telemind was another resource that I used personally postpartum to find a counselor virtually that worked with my schedule, and I could preference like a biblical counselor, like a spiritual leadership influence in my counseling, which, and honestly, this is kind of a pivot, but one of the things I want to talk about in this episode is just like love. It's like that I love quote. But I think just with everything so prevalent in our culture right now, and we're coming up on Pride Month, and it's just love has so many definitions, and like people have so many different feelings about it. And so I wanted to just like openly talk about it with Joseph of like our feelings individually, or like what does love mean to you?
Yeah, so for me, love is an action verb. Once again, kind of the fairy tale idea of it is that you see someone, you fall into love, and it's just like this unstoppable thing that just occurs to you. Love is not just this ditch that you accidentally fall into and that you can't get out of, and now you're stuck with this person for the rest of your life. It is a choice. It is an action verb. It's something that you do every single day. You literally have to decide to love the one you're with, but it's not just about your words and what you say. All those things are absolutely a factor that you have to do, depending on your partner's love language. And so it's not just about me saying those things. I have to figure out the things that I need to do, whether that be, leaving a sticky note around the house for Reyna, or, once when I get home, I'm picking up the house because she's had a long day with Ledger because he's a terrorist and he takes out everything, and sometimes puts it back. or maybe it's me cooking dinner or doing the dishes. But it's absolutely an action that you have to decide to do every single day. It's not just this thing that's in the air, or like this feeling that's in your gut, because otherwise you could say that you love your dog because you feel this connection, but your dog's not going to do anything for you unless you have like a really cool one. But just because it's this thing that you feel doesn't mean it's actually love, because then that's just your feeling of love. The action verb portion really follows the the agape version of love, if you're familiar with the Greek. The brotherhood, unending brotherly love is really my version that I kind of take personally and run with.
And one of the like important keys to that is like Joseph and I are both Christians, or like believers, and so like our marriage vows were based on the fact that we were called to love each other in that agape love, the unconditional love mirrored to Christ. And so I mean, we've totally talked about this. Like, love, I think, for me, one of the things that's been apparent is, like, it's a choice. And Joseph really just, like, painted all of that out perfectly. But, yeah, we've even had open conversations recently about, I don't feel like I did when we first were dating, or when we first got married. Like, we've openly talked about, like, do we make a mistake? Like, where did all those butterflies and good feelings go? And not that like our life is wrong or our marriage is stressful. Like, yes, the army is stressful and we have a small child, but even between the two of us, it's just been this place of learning how to choose him in the unconditional image of Christ, and knowing that he's going to be 20 different people. And I think we read that in Timothy Keller's book.
Yeah, I think it's his The Meaning of Marriage book that he has.
Yeah, and so I think in that section he just talks about like I fell in love with my wife when we got married, but the beautiful thing about marriage was that I got to fall in love with 20 different versions of her, and I can confidently say now, like, we've only been married for almost 5 years, but the love that I have for Joseph is totally different because he's a different person now, and I've been able to see all the different aspects of that, all the different layers to who he is. And it's just funny because I was even talking to a friend about this the other day of like, and we'll get into this a little bit later, of just if I could talk to Reyna at who she was standing at the altar and prepare her for marriage, it's none of the things that I thought I knew going into marriage. And like that was part of this episode, was like all the things that I wish I had known, all the things we've learned together, all the things that we're still learning together. And it's love is not it. And love is a choice. And if we're called to love each other and others unconditionally, like Jesus didn't hesitate when he got on the cross. And I hesitate a lot when Joseph asks me to do things, or we need to do laundry, need to do dishes, and the mundane things of marriage. And that's honestly been the most humbling part of being married to someone that's steadfast and truly does love you and walks that out as an action verb. Is it's humbling, and it shows you how selfish you are. And love isn't a feeling, and you choose to love each other even when the feelings like fizzle out, but you get to love each other in a whole new way and learn what each other, and you get to learn what that means to each other.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing before we kind of move on. Reyna mentioned, falling in love over and over again. And sometimes the reason that you fall in love, that your spouse falls in love with you again, is because you also change. Reyna and I have kind of talked about it, how, I didn't expect to be marrying a perfect individual. So I didn't go to the marble quarry and get this like beautiful statue that I thought Reyna was. I got this beautiful block of marble that I knew that I was going to be able to work with. And Reyna saw this block of mediocre copper that she knew that she was also going to be able to work with. And that's why it's painful over time, because you're choosing like, hey, this edge is a little rough. I don't think this is what needs to be here. And you have to go through and chisel those things away with each other. And that's why you have to be delicate about it and not do it negatively, because if you go in too hard, you're going to chip off way too much, and that portion may never heal again.
Yeah, and I think we've learned that in our personality differences. It's like I'm a tough chiseler. I go in all or nothing all at once, and I think that it speaks volumes to just like how I was raised and my personality differences. But like I said, marriage, and Timothy Keller talks about it in several of his books, but it's the quote that stuck out to me, and I know I mentioned on the show before, is marriage is not meant to make you happy but holy. And I remember texting a friend, pretty sure within the like first couple months of us being married, because Joseph was in and out with military training. I was home alone. I was in a new state, far from friends and family, had nobody. And I just remember thinking, like, the first couple months in our little podunk apartment full of cockroaches, and just navigating what love means, and texting her and being like, this is way harder than what I thought it was going to be. And honestly, it's the most sanctifying thing. Now being a mother, I know motherhood is the most sanctifying thing. But it's just been really interesting to be able to learn how to love Joseph well, while also knowing like God has equipped him to love me well. And we don't always do it perfectly. So I want to close with just some of the resources and things that we've done, read, talked about that have really stuck with us. I think one of those things we already mentioned was Timothy Keller's book, Meaning of Marriage. That was super helpful. I think we read that while we were dating or engaged, and that made all the difference. One of the other things I think back to was Ben Stewart's Single, Dating, Engaged, Married book. That I think comes from a sermon series of his that I'm pretty sure I watched like 5 or 6 times while I was single in college. I'm pretty sure like while I was dating, and we did it with some friends and just watched his whole sermon series, which is all pretty much compiled into his book. And I loved that book and just his perspective on navigating each of those stages in a way that calls you to be holy and not happy.
Yeah, so for me, if I was to tell my younger self things that I know now, it would absolutely be what uncleaving from your mother and father actually means. It is not just that's the time that you get to move out of the house, if that's how your parents decided when you left the house. It manifests itself in so many different ways, down to how you expect to be loved, how you expect to, plan or cook your meals, or what roles you and your significant other decide to take on throughout the house, um, down to how you expect to have conversations or what you expect to do for holidays. Ray and I grew up very conservative, and going to a Baptist church. Raina didn't really start going to church until she was in late high school. So how maybe some like more traditional Christian holidays were handled in my house growing up versus her house were differently. And then now, and we went through counseling prior to marriage. We read, Single Dating Engaged, Meaning of Marriage by Timothy Keller, Love and Respect by Gregory Emmerich, I think is the author, and then premarital counseling as well. And even still doing all of those things and actively thinking and discussing those things with ourselves and close friends, I'm still wildly unprepared for marriage. And that's just always going to be the case for anybody that gets married. And even, unfortunately, it'll be the same way for Ledger. Even though Rain and I will tell him everything that we know, he will still just be unprepared because he's a human being.
Yeah.
And so knowing what uncleaving truly means, and what it truly means is you forsake everything that is not rooted in the gospel, that is the Bible as a whole, and then you have a face-to-face conversation or FaceTime if you're like me, who is FaceTiming Rain at a live fire range in the background trying to discuss wedding planning. So maybe it's over text or it's over FaceTime, but it has to be a deliberate conversation where each of you can understand what the other person is saying. And it's a conversation that can't be had to be right. It has to be a conversation that can be had for you to understand each other. And that's really been like the biggest thing for me, at least, is to like actually understand, okay, do I want this because I think this is right? Or do I want this because this is just what I did growing up? And that's a real hard conversation that you have to have with yourself, both, with your spouse and privately, because really what you're doing is you're now tearing down the fabric of how your parents raised you. And that's a very hard thing for a lot of people to overcome, because I think very highly of both my parents. They both raised me, I think, incredible, and they knocked it out of the park. But once again, they're also still human beings, and maybe had a couple strikeouts here and there that you unfortunately don't realize until you're exposed to somebody else, such as a spouse or a hard situation. Because like I said, with hard situations, you fall back to immediately what you know, and you're not on your own. You have a spouse who is also doing that hard thing with you. So you have to do it with them and have that shared burden from the same perspective. No one likes a leader that's, going through something in a comfortable situation while the other one is just like sitting out in the rain, also trying to deal with that same circumstance. So knowing what uncleaving is the biggest thing for me. And it's one thing that I do talk about with other friends. And for resources, like those are the resources that I really just mentioned. That Timothy Keller has a podcast. He was a pastor up in New York for a little while. Unfortunately, passed away last year. But he, someone that used to work for him, is every single day uploading podcasts of his sermons onto Spotify, and it's fantastic. He's got a 10-part marriage series that's somewhere in there. And I listened to that 10-part series probably 3 or 4 times in a row, and each part is probably about 45 minutes to an hour. And it's absolutely incredible. And then obviously there are a couple other podcasts on Spotify that you can easily go and look out. But he's the one that I always fall back on, because he is very, very rooted in doctrine and the gospel. And it's not a, hey, if you just love your wife and if you just love the Lord, then like things are going to be great.
Yeah.
He's very much a realistic individual of, if you love this and you try to love your wife, she may not want it for a week or two. And that's fine, because you're still called to love her and to action that love to keep going.
I do want to touch on one of the things, like you said, that we've learned, I think, before we finish with our closing question, is that I think honestly we do so much better, or we're in sync when we revisit like our weekly questions, or like have a weekly check-in. So I know like we were really good for a season of having like a Sunday night check-in of, hey, and we went through, I think, these 3 questions. It was 1, like, how did I love you well this week? 2, how did I not love you well this week? And that was kind of the open space of like, hey, if I, you know, bothered you, irritated you, hurt you, that was like the open forum to address that. Because that, I think, was just something we never really addressed in my house growing up. So like resentment was always like a hot topic, or like addressing things that hurt you because we couldn't. And so that was like an informal, formal place to be like, hey, actually on Tuesday, I got really bent out of shape when you did this, but I didn't want to say anything about it. But it's literally Sunday and I've been thinking about it and I probably should talk to you about it now. That I thought was super helpful. And then the third thing was like, what do you see God doing in me right now? And I think that question for me, as someone who really needs verbal affirmation and just that encouragement to know that the Lord is pruning me as much as it hurts me that like other people are seeing the fruit, that affirmation to have Joseph speak into me spiritually and like encourage and affirm my spiritual growth, or correct me and exhort me in that area, was super helpful, because I think it was just another sense of intimacy and vulnerability that not anybody else gets to see that aspect of my heart. So I think those 3 questions were something that I learned. I think we did really well. We're in a really healthy place when we do those consistently. We don't always do them consistently, but I think that was always super helpful for us.
Yeah, and doing them consistently is very important. But one thing that I began to notice with us doing it all the time, if not, every couple of days, I personally take failure and mistakes straight to the heart. I take them very seriously, and I do not forget them. And so one thing that I began to realize that with my personality, I was beginning to become very hard and difficult on myself, because then on the weekly, I would just hear all these things that I was doing wrong. Because we would also ask, how can I love you better? And if I can love you better in a certain way, then that kind of implies you're not doing something the correct way. And so I would take that really hard. So sometimes you just have to find a good flow. We're definitely not in the flow of it right now. But doing it too much or too hard or too serious, as we said, you've got to be very gentle with those critiques that you give each other, because sometimes they can be taken hard if taken too often. Because it made me feel like I just couldn't ever get anything right.
Yeah, and I think that was a part of the conversation, was addressing my hurts to Joseph, but also understanding that I had to equally affirm him in the places where he was growing and doing really well, instead of just like taking all the things that he was changing and then like, okay, cool, you're doing like great job, and like actually being intentional to affirm him in the places that I addressed with him to begin with. And that was like humbling for me, and I think we've done a lot better, and just pointing at, if we're going to address something specifically, like leaving your socks on the floor and he picks them up, like affirm that, be like, babe, thank you so much for picking your socks up off the floor, because it shows you, one, like they care enough to listen, but also it's not going unnoticed that they are making the small steps to love you better because of how you addressed it. So I can't believe we're already doing our closing question. It's been 30 minutes. It's been a good chat. Okay. Babe, if you had any piece of wisdom for your younger self or for a community that is listening, what would you share?
Well, I made a rookie move because I think I already answered this question a couple minutes ago, because it's my first time on the podcast. But if I was to give a second thing outside of knowing what uncleaving from your mother and father actually was, it would have to be, you have to let yourself be loved. Kind of a saying in the Army is, people first, except the leaders. Because sometimes we really forget about ourselves. When I was in a company executive officer, I recall having extremely bad habits, and the person I worked with didn't make it any better. First Sergeant Andrew Browning, because he would also come in and I'd already have an energy drink in the morning because I have to have fuel, and then I would just be like, all right, I'm just gonna get this one thing done, and then I'll eat lunch after that, and then it's like 3 o'clock, and so now I haven't had anything except caffeine since breakfast, and then he would come in from his little trip to the shopette with another energy drink, and I'd be like, thank you, and then I would keep working. And so knowing when to love yourself is extremely important. You have to have a balance of it, and sometimes you just have to communicate that up front to your spouse, because you may feel like it is your job to support your spouse in everything, because it absolutely is, but you can only do that for so long before you start to get burnt out, before you start to have no energy, and then that starts creeping into the realm of resentment, of I'm always doing these things, and even though you're doing them willingly over and over and over again, you still begin to have this anger towards the other person, and they think that you're doing it willingly, because you are, and you want to love that person, and you do it with a smile on your face, but they don't realize what's happening underneath. So you have to be willing to communicate, hey, I think right now I need this. Or if your spouse is offering, hey, you should go do this, you should probably say yes. It's not a trap, I promise. But you have to communicate it.
Yeah, I think that's I laugh because that's a conversation Joseph has with me all the time. He's like, why don't you go get a coffee, or go to the thrift store, or Reyna, just go get out of the house. And I mom guilt partially, but I think it comes down to selfishness, because I almost want to be able to say, no, I do all these things and I don't need a break. And that's like a sinfulness and like pridefulness of like, well, I do all this and I don't complain and I don't ask for help and I don't get to take a break, I think that's just been something I've been working on, is like, cool, if Joseph offers for me to take a couple hours for me to go work on the podcast, or like go sit in the bath and read, or do nothing, or whatever it may be, go and run to the store and get groceries in silence, like, it's not selfish of me to do that. And I think in the same way of like, if Joseph asks me to go to the gym on the weekend or go meet with friends in something that's like not planned, I can't tell him yes because I want to love him and then have an attitude when he gets home because I said yes to the thing that he asked me to do, because then that's not loving either. That was a good one, babe.
Yeah, and you have to also make sure that when this happens, you don't communicate too much. Once again, this is kind of the flavor of your marriage, but you can't communicate too much that what you're doing is a sacrifice, because then that can lead to like guilt from the other partner. If I was, let Reyna go to the gym, I say let. She's a grown woman. She can ask, and I'll go. She'll obviously go. If Reyna wants to go to the gym, and like, yes, that's what we agree upon for, once again, expectations for the rest of the day. When Reyna's at the gym, I'm not going to text her and be like, Ledger's yelling, or Ledger's crying, or when she gets back, she's like, how was it? I'm not going to be like, it was terrible. It was the worst. I will, suck my tears back into my eyes and be like, it was great. We got a blast. He really loves you. But sometimes maybe you do. Maybe you do need to say, hey, that was kind of a lot. Maybe you come back to the gym, 15 minutes earlier than you did, and that'll be a good balance. Once again, you have to find that flavor of what works for both of you.
Yeah, we started that, I think, while we were dating, because it's like that King Julian clip where he is like talking to the gods in the second Madagascar about the rain. He's like, I don't want any more sacrifice, okay? And I think that's just something that we've kind of held on to in our marriage, and then I think in parenthood, is like, I don't want to hear that loving you is a sacrifice, because then it just tastes sour in your mouth. Like, I don't want to know how much of a sacrifice it is for you to love me. I just want you to love me. So that was really good, babe. That was good stuff. So, you guys, this is almost a 35-minute episode. Wow, that went a lot longer than I thought it was, but it was so good. I can't wait to do a parenthood episode, maybe like a weenie parenthood episode, because we're still weenies. We're winging it. I mean, we're winging it in marriage too, but these are just some of the tangible things I think have been helpful for us in our marriage. It's been conversations we've had with several friends, and I hope it blesses you. So we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.